Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Everyone, can I hear you, Nick, Jeff?
Hi.
For joining.
I can hear you.
All right. Awesome.
Here.
So welcome to One Pain Point at a Time, Microservices for Incremental Insurance Innovation. I am Wendy Ahrens-Corman. I am the CEO of Oak Global. I'm just going to share my screen for a couple of slides for you very quickly. Oak Global is a insurance software technology provider. We do focus on microservices. I'm going to introduce Nick and Jeff to you in just a minute, but before I do that, I just wanted to say that, the reason why we're here and the importance of having this webinar is to educate the industry on microservices. Back in 2000, in early 2000, 2001, I was a part of a group called Duck Creek Technologies that introduced this whole concept of tool-based XML technologies into the industry, and it was a big challenge. It was an educational challenge. We were used to traditional models with software development, either internal or external, and we took this chance of trying to change things in the industry. And we're sort of at the same point now, and that's why the importance of this webinar for us, because of the fact that we want to educate people on microservices. What are they? How do you use them? What's the benefits? What's the disadvantages? But as we start to look at new solutions in the industry, it's important to understand what is evolving and how you might be able to take advantage of that. And so that's why we're here to spend a little time with you on that. Let me just get to the next slide here, and I'll introduce to you Nick. I'm sure you all might know Nick already. But Nick Lamparelli is with us. He's the co-founder and chief underwriting officer of Rethought Insurance. Nick is a 20+ year insurance veteran and has worked in various capacities in the industry, including broking, underwriting, analytics. I'm sure a lot of you have seen Nick on various podcasts. A lot of people follow him on Twitter. He's very innovative as well as insurance savvy. So thank you, Nick, for being here.
Thanks, Wendy.
And Jeff Goldberg, who everybody knows, Jeff, right? So Jeff is the EVP of Research and Consulting at Noverica. His expertise includes a variety of things, including data analytics, SaaS and cloud computing, data governance. Jeff has extensive experience in the industry and technology. Not only did he work for analysts, but he's also worked on the insurance carrier side, and he's also worked for Microsoft. So he's been very versed in our industry and technology, and hence the analyst hat for him is obviously a great fit. And we all love talking with Jeff and hearing about his insights. So with that, I would like to pass it off to Jeff, because what he's going to do is he's going to give us a little bit of an education from the analyst perspective as to what microservices are, and like I said before, the advantages, disadvantages, and things like that. So Jeff, all yours.
Thank you, Wendy. And that was perhaps the nicest introduction I've gotten. So I really appreciate that.
Okay.
And yes, obviously, this is a wonderful panel to be a part of. It's really wonderful to be talking here with you today. So what I want to do is start off by putting microservices in context, talking about, and I've got a few slides, and I don't want to spend too much time on slides because I really want to get to the conversation. But what, you're absolutely, and Wendy's point about education is absolutely right. So much of technology evolution in the insurance industry is about education and understanding. We all have to figure out what something means, why it matters to us. And I mean, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the business value than the tech. This is just a topic that the tech and the business value are very tied together. It's hard to talk about microservices without thinking about it as a technology approach, but it really is about the way it will deliver value to the organization. It is not just a new tech idea. I'm not going to talk about Noverica, and I actually cut out all the slides from this in order to keep it short that were about our surveys. So let's move on to what are microservices. Few quotes. A lot of we've kind of been through this before. We've gone through API enablement. We've gone through SOA, or services-oriented architecture. And the reality is, and some people say, is this any different? And in some ways it's not. It is in some ways an evolution. It's software services-oriented architecture done right. It is the next phase of that will help us optimize our infrastructure in a cloud scale mode. But what does that mean? Individual microservices are essentially standalone box that really can run on their own. I'm not going to read all those business bullet points, but the point is, you get one thing that delivers one set of capabilities, as opposed to, and this is really where it comes in, are big systems that deliver everything across multiple areas. And the trend over the last couple of decades has been for the core system vendors to grow and grow and grow what they do, where you deliver everything at once in one big giant box. While microservices are pulling things into smaller and smaller services that do individual things. And as insurers, we're actually used to working with microservices already. If you do an address validation check, it's one capability that stands alone, and it does one thing really well. And if it changes, or you have to upgrade it, or you have to change which address validation service you're using, it's pretty easy to do that because that address validation is essentially a microservice. Though really, when we talk about microservices, we're not just talking about single function third-party tools. We're talking about your whole rethinking the way your architecture works, so that each capability in the organization is delivered in this self-contained approach. Now, it's not going to happen overnight, and here's a little picture of how the world's going to evolve. Right? We have our traditional services where you've got on the left here the kind of monolithic approach where all the logic is sitting together. It will sit seamlessly with a modern microservices approach where you have each individual box kind of integrating into the network. This picture both shows the difference. It's not radical. It's just kind of breaking apart the box into subservices, but also this idea that these things will evolve together. You're not going to flip the switch overnight, but you might start bringing in microservices over time, either through your own build or through partners. So why is this important? Why do we care about core systems being a microservices architecture? One, it's really built for the cloud, built for distribution across hybrid environments. That's something we're really focused on now. The whole industry is moving off on-prem into the cloud. You need to have an architecture that is built best practice for that. The second is, like I said, core systems have been bundled together, but there are really tons of different products. It's convenient to have one vendor delivering one thing in one box that's pre-integrated, but that is convenience doesn't necessarily mean best practice architecture, and it creates a lot of other problems. And the reality is different pieces of this are evolving at different rates. There's upgrades happening at different times. Right now, if one thing is updated in your big box, you have to take an upgrade of the whole thing. And we all know how expensive and complicated and problematic those upgrades are. Microservices allow you to focus on one piece at a time without worrying about the whole thing breaking. And the reality is you might want to work with different players. We've the pendulum swung from best of breed to all-in-one. We're in a big swing back towards best of breed. And this is an architecture that makes that much easier to do. So here, many of you may have already seen the Novarica core systems map. Don't try to read these boxes. This is for representational purposes only. We have a map that shows all the different boxes of the core systems: policy, billing, claims, agent portal. And what we've done is started saying, well, what does the future really look like? Do we start exploding that to each of its core capabilities? You have to start thinking about what are you really getting in any system, and which piece of it do you want to be an expert in and want to build yourself? It's a competitive differentiator. Which pieces are something you want to get through your vendors, and can they be thought of in this microservices way? And like I said, we're not going to get there overnight. No one's going to throw out their whole core system, all of their core systems tomorrow to get a microservices version. But actually, historically, that's what you'd had to do. Your policy, billing, claim system are getting old. Well, you got to replace them all at once. Microservices let you say, well, maybe we just replace our the workflow engine. Maybe we just in our agent portal, instead of throwing the whole thing out, we just update the quote engine, the individual capabilities, and piece by piece start getting to this feature. So what are some of the best practices? Think about the cloud. That's one of the reasons you're doing this. Even if it's an on-prem environment, it's still a best practice, but the cloud is really where this drives towards. It does mean you're looking at a lot of different services that are built and maintained somewhat separately. Having some architectural principles across all of them will be very valuable if you're building them yourself. Think about how you contain them, how you deploy them. I mean, we should always have best practices for deploying via automation and containerization. We don't. Sometimes you adopt an architecture approach, though, that helps you do it. It means you can deliver things more quickly at a better place when you want to. The business users don't have to wait for 6 to 9 months to get an upgrade. They can get it right away because you're really minimizing and automating that deployment. Keep it micro, right? If you start to pack too much into it, it's no longer a microservice, it's a macro service, AKA a traditional system, and understand why you're doing it. I don't want to say that everyone needs to be running to microservices. Wendy probably wants to say that, but it is understanding what you're doing and what the outcome is and what the value is for the organization, the faster upgrades, the better control, the easier to maintain without kind of cascading bugs, better service and support and timelines for the business. These are the things that need to drive your investment in microservices. I got a challenge slide here. I don't want to spend too much time on that because we're really talking about why they're great. But I do want to say there are challenges. You have to learn. It is something, you're always making trade-offs, and that's okay. Trade-offs are part of making investments in strategy, and there are trade-offs with microservices architecture, but I really believe the end result is going to be better systems, better support, better functionality delivery for the whole industry. And that's all my slides for today, because I want to get into the conversation. And I'm going to say, oh, we can talk more. Well, we're going to talk more right now. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can see our faces and pull.
There you go. There you go. So before I have a question for Nick, and you made a lot of really interesting points that I wrote a couple of notes down that I'd like to expand upon during the session. But if anyone has a question that they'd like for any of us to answer, please put that into the system. I don't know how you do that, but please do that. And I'll check it and grab your question, and if you want it to someone specific, please let us know as well. But Nick, so Jeff made the comment about the traditional model, right? The rip and replace, right? So being in sales, and people coming to us and looking for a solution, what happens a lot of times is people come and say, they're looking for a full policy admin solution, right? It's a traditional way of looking to solve a problem. And so what we do is we ask them where their pain points are. What's your pain point? To Jeff's graph there, is it rating? Is it documents? Is it workflow? Is it front end? So you and I have had this conversation before, Nick, and you seem to have moved on from that model of the complete solution to the pain point. So if you could talk a little bit about, your perspective on that, and what got you there, that would be a great start. Going from the
thank you.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, my day-to-day business of running an MGA and being chief underwriting officer, we sort of thought about it that way, Wendy, when we first started. Hey, we're going to need like this policy management system, and none of them could do what we needed them to do, right? So in many ways, we had to start from scratch. As Jeff's statement about the entire platform, there was no platform that was, we were pushing the boundaries on what was being done from an underwriting basis. There were no platforms. Even the insurtechs that were in the policy management didn't know what to do with us because of all of the the APIs out and the APIs in and the APIs internally on what we were trying to do, it was already decided ahead of time we would go in that direction. And our day-to-day, we have delegated authority books, so we essentially act like a carrier. We have a lot of the same pain points that they have, having delegated authority.
Right.
And I can tell you, we've sort of broke them down to kind of 3 buckets of pain points, but I don't think the first bucket has ever been solved in a sophisticated way, even with, a few decades of digitization that's been occurring, which is just the communication with whoever your customer is. We're on the E&S side, so our customers are agents and brokers. I would assume most carriers are in the same boat, but we've not advanced very far in that. You would have thought with all of the communication tools that we have, all of the digital tools that we have, that would have been solved. But being digital has actually increased the complexity, because now we have to expand the amount of information that we can potentially collect. Spreadsheets, PDFs,
Mm.
elevation certificates, like structured data, unstructured data, photos. In what we do, we still have not figured out, like, what's the proper application protocol for this. If we put our application up, sure, we can get some of our agents and brokers to participate in that, and that's fantastic. But we get a lot of brokers that are just like, I don't have time to do that. Will you take an Accord application? Will you take someone, one of our competitors' application? And we've had to adapt to accommodate that. And so then there's the back and forth, like that whole front end, which you can call, CRM, CLM, interacting with them, making sure that the data that you're getting is the right data, that it's scalable, that you're not spending an inordinate amount of time just trying to collect the information. That's still a challenge. And I think it's still a challenge for much of the industry.
Yeah. So interesting. That's an interesting point about the structured and unstructured data, because that is the talk of the town, right? In terms of brokers are still sending MGAs the one form, right? Some of them are writing it out still instead of typing it out, right? But that's the incoming submissions. I mean, here's a good case study where we're talking to an MGA that had 10 to 15,000 submissions a month, right? That's a lot of submissions to have to go through the documents. So microservices, data, unstructured data, and taking the data extraction, I guess is the way to say it. That's a piece of it. And then you talk about the cleansing aspect of it, right? Looking at the data, applying rules to it, maybe doing some external verification, or maybe some rating. All of those are little teeny pieces that can come together to solve that over time. But that seems to be that structured data piece. Jeff, I'm sure you could talk all day about that. That is a huge pain point in the industry. And just to be able to take one microservice and be able to solve that would be an enormous win, I think, for anyone who deals with that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of these things where you'll probably start seeing some of the core system vendors either build or buy that kind of functionality and wrap it in, but it doesn't really feel like it fits to me. We're seeing all these point solutions start evolving that do read an Accord form for you into digital data, or interpret an image and turn that into some kind of assessment. That makes sense as individual services that you'll orchestrate into your overall environment. And that's scary for a lot of insurers, right? As soon as you start saying, well, you got to orchestrate this in, insurers have limited budgets, they have limited resources, but the fact is that everything is moving in that direction, and so both externally and internally we'll start looking like that. And Nick, you talked about one of the reasons you had trouble finding the right system is because of all the APIs going out and going in that you need to manage. And that's, we're moving into a world where systems are an ecosystem rather than a box. As everything goes on the cloud, there are so many different partners. Everybody is, and I'm not talking traditional partners. I'm talking about like regulatory bodies that you need to integrate to, and the the assessors and all the third parties you work with, like everyone is going to be part of this, is going to start plugging into an ecosystem. And that requires a cloud architecture that is going to think about that from the ground up.
Yeah. So talking about the cloud for a second, I just want to pop to that. Then I want to talk about data transfer, because that's what it is. It's cloud and data transfer. It seems it's all data.
Mm-hmm.
But we still talk to carriers who say, can we still license your product on-prem?
Yeah.
And we try to talk to them about the pros and the cons of both sides, especially because there's a lot more ransomware out there, right? And if they come on-prem and they get you, right?
Yeah.
And we're in the business to process insurance policies, and service our customers, but not necessarily in the job of security.
Yeah.
So are you seeing more insurers go towards the cloud now? Are they accepting it? Because we still get the questions, and is that an education process for people as well, or do they need to get hit in order to move, right?
No, the pendulum is, I keep using the pendulum metaphor, but this is another good one. The tipping point has been reached. We're definitely, the insurance industry is now more interested in cloud than on-prem. That was not true even a couple of years ago. I would say in 2019, we started to see it really taking off, even for core systems. And then 2020 hit us, and lots of insurers who had to go to remote work, the only people who had to go to the office were the people processing the mail and the people managing the data center, the on-prem data center. And that was
writing checks.
Writing checks. That's part of the mail, right? Check printing and mailing, or check acceptance and cashing. So everyone, I would say the large majority of the industry now wants to go to the cloud. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean shifting everything immediately? No. Everyone's put lots of investment into on-prem. This is going to be a slow transition. And it does mean, and it still doesn't mean everyone, but I would say the majority of insurers looking for core systems are looking for them to be in the cloud. I still don't think the insurance industry truly understands what that means. I think in many cases, you're talking like, well, whatever I've done on-prem, can I now do that in a cloud service? It feels a little bit more like managed services or managed hosting. And so there's still educate, but it is a good step, and it will get us closer to a vision of a real hyper-scalable ecosystem in the cloud.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jeff. I think there's a misconception, and we've seen it before even the cloud element. Taking your paper application and turning it into a fillable form PDF. Hey, we just digitized our application. That's not what that means, right? So there's that element, and I think I'm seeing the same thing with, hey, we took the stuff that we did on-prem and now we put it up on AWS. Now it's cloud-based. It's like, that's not what cloud means. It's I think a very subtle distinction of what you introduced on your slides, which is cloud mixed with those microservices or other services allows you to run more efficiently and effectively. Like I do think the very simple example is your address verification. Like, can you imagine having to shut down and update an entire new software update just to update the address verification? Like, nobody would do that. So the way software vendors work in this area is they build up like a list of bugs or a list of features. They kind of package it all together and they'll release it all at one time. But a lot of my experience has been when the bugs do hit, a lot of the systems have to shut down for the new pieces to come in, and that's what cloud with microservices solves. The ability to expand and contract the resources that are required for you to work on demand, automatically. It just, hey, we need a new database. It just automatically triggers and it just starts working for you. You don't need a human being to sit there and, put something into, a stack for it to work. And also, as software gets developed, those individual pieces can get developed. So I think there is a big, huge misconception in the insurance industry of what cloud means. And if they don't understand what it means, I don't think they're going to be able to understand the advantages and the benefits that get from it.
Yeah. And to your point about the shutting everything down to upgrade, right? This industry's been burned, right? Sometimes you look at insurer behavior with their vendor partners, and it feels a little irrational, right? A vendor is coming and saying, "Hey, we had a patch to the rating engine," and the insurer says, "Okay, we're going to test it for 6 months before we take it," right? You're like, "That's great." But they've been burned before because the vendors have said, "Hey, we updated the rating engine. We promise it's a small update." But because you have these monolithic systems that are kind of all tendrils connecting to each other, they take the update, they say, "Oh, look, the rating engine's fixed." And then 3 weeks later, they realize our billing is broken, right? And you're like, "How did billing break?" Because that's how monolithic architectures work. And so now when next time they get an update patch, they have to test every single thing over again before they're comfortable with it. Microservices and cloud in this sort of proper best practice approach creates more of a real contract that's not going to happen in that way, and that you can trust from a fundamental level that things will be delivered properly. And it's going to take a while to build that confidence, though. You can't, even you explain and educate, the insurance industry isn't just going to trust that it's true. They're going to have to see it be proven true over and over.
Yeah, your testing analogy, your testing use case, I think actually hits home, because I've been involved in things like that where you have to create even on-prem, Wendy, you have to create 2 environments. You have to create a testing environment and then a production environment. That's another advantage of cloud, is you can have multiple environments where you can test a little piece. You can, and with the cloud, you can even create automation in the testing, right? So it doesn't have to take 6 months. Like you have all the scripts can deploy on their own, and they can go to one of the environments that has the newest update, make that test, and you can literally just say, "Okay, this is the one we're going to transition over to production." There's the tech industry has really shown how to do this. So almost all of the new software companies are cloud-based, and we can learn a lot for how they've created their their core technology in the cloud to be able to have testing environments for their software developers to, write code, decide whether it's going to work or not before they decide, okay, this is going from a beta to live. We're going to deploy it at a certain time. Tech company has already figured out how to do that. We are well behind in that regard.
Yeah. And, the combination of cloud-based, right, microservices, and the element of a no-code tool, which is becoming, more prevalent in the industry. Let's not forget, it brings the price points down.
Right.
Because it's quicker to develop and deploy, right? It's easier to maintain, right? And when you have a no-code environment and you're able to truly configure without hiring this ecosystem of expensive resources to do the work, the price points are going to start to come down. And I find that to be quite refreshing, to be honest with you, that, you don't have to spend, $30 million over a period of, so many years to get your system up and running. And that's it's a very true statement, because it's the combination of things in the quick to market that end up saying it's not that expensive, right? Because it's a single instance of the code, right? So you don't have many instances of the code. It's a single instance that you're updating, and multiple companies are using the same instance. So the sharing part of it brings the cost down, and then obviously the testing and the implementation timeline as well. So I think that's a really positive thing for the industry. I think that talk about traditional and habits and what we're used to. People are just used to spending a lot of money on technology, and they're very used to not getting as much as they expected out of the technology, or spending X percentage more because the project got delayed, or for whatever reason. And it's a very bad habit for people to get into.
And it's worse than that, Wendy. There's no accounting for all of the extra workload that individual teams are doing on their own independently. Whether, the underwriting team building VBA codes in Excel to do things that the software just can't do, and they need that work. So they build it themselves. I'm familiar with lots of actuarial teams, because they have the technical skills, a lot of the actuaries, to just go in. They'll just build their own models. They'll just build their own things
That's right.
internally. But I've seen it across.
Yeah.
I've seen it across a lot of those things. And I think, listen, if it, for those that are listening, that I think, there's what does digitization mean? What does cloud mean? I think like they should investigate what no code means, because I think that is another big time element in terms of effectiveness of how an insurance carrier can operate. There are tech companies being built, entire tech companies being built on no code platforms. There's so many different of these like microservice tools out there that you can string together. You can actually build up businesses. There's no reason why an insurance operation couldn't take advantage of no code tools where you're just, like Lego blocks, putting the workflow together, and the system itself is smart enough to know, okay, I need to move data from this to this to this without anyone writing a line of code to instruct the platform on what to do.
So I'd like to investigate the cost being less overall, Wendy, because I think, you talked about earlier about moving to like the introducing metadata and rules and tools and XML configuration to the insurance industry was also supposed to make things less expensive. And in fact, our core system implementation probably got bigger after that, taking years and years. And partially the reason it got bigger is because you could do more, so you did do more, right? That's not necessarily the fault of the systems. So I feel like for our audience, okay, so is this just going to make things, are we saying it's going to be less expensive, but it's not, it's going to be bigger? And I think no, but there's a few, let's examine it. The other thing I think the industry's been learning and really adapted well is agile. A new way of thinking about approaching, and microservices in the cloud really go hand in hand with agile methodology, which is really, because the idea is you're not replacing everything at once. Frankly, doesn't really work with agile. Like trying to do a policy billing claims replacement in agile doesn't really make that much sense. And of course, those projects balloon out of control in size. You take a microservices approach, you're solving one pain point at a time, right? One piece at a time. It's truly agile. You figure out what's most important next. You solve that. You're slowly changing. And I want to say, maybe in the end, it does, even if it does take as long and cost as much to get to that final state, which I don't think it will, because a lot of the costs are the unanticipated things. And this helps you avoid that. But even if it does, you've been delivering value to the organization every single step of the way. Each release is clear value, self-contained, makes a difference to the organization. So it's not even so much about cost as about understanding what the cost is getting you. And that is really how you get an insurance organization and all of the stakeholders to really keep investing and be excited and see this as a partnership to delivering value. And microservices and agile really make sure you're always working on the highest priority things and delivering value. Whatever another.
So let me give you a couple examples. Someone had asked a question for simple real world examples of microservices. So let me address both of that one, and I'm also going to talk through the agile. But simple real world example of microservices, we have a customer who has 3 backend policy admin solutions, and they wanted to do point of sale for a couple of products. They had the rating engine, and they had this one policy system that had those products that couldn't be extended, didn't have its own extension for a portal. So we did the front end user experience, which includes rules. Everything has rules in it these days, right? Workflow and things like that. Use their rating engine, generated a quote document, and then we use the policy system for the policy. So we sort of filled the gaps, and that's what microservices does. Another example there is one of the things about microservices as well is that they are reusable. So this particular client decided they wanted to do a broker portal. So they're reusing the user experience service, and the user experience service is providing a single user experience, it doesn't matter how many different disparate systems are in the back to create a single, user experience for that broker. I probably said user experience, single user experience 1,000 times. But so they don't know how many systems are in the back. All they know is they're getting the information, that they want, and it's being delivered in a very clean, singular look and feel type of thing. So that's a simple example. Microservices. One other example is anyone who has a policy system that they cannot externalize their rates and their documents, for example, and change them on their own based on effective dates and changes, and relying on the policy system. You can use a rating microservice and a document microservice, and have those two microservices work with the existing policy system and replace the rating and the document pieces. Or you could just do the rating or just the documents. It doesn't matter. But that's an example of how you would extend the existing environment versus ripping it out and trying to start from scratch. We try to encourage people, don't rip it out. Let's figure out where the pain point is, and let's fix it. Now, the other part about it is the agile development side of it. And by the way, those projects are they're fairly quick. And that, I can't tell you exactly how long they took, but they were on budget, on time. There's assumptions made. It's a regular project plan, but to be on budget and on time is, from my perspective, is a huge win. Everyone has great software. Can you implement it, right? That's the big question. So, but on the agile side, we use agile development methodology, and we also use agile in how we deliver, right? So there's the agile development methodology. We say every 2 weeks we have a sprint, and in that sprint, you're going to get something that's production ready. And that's what Jeff is talking about. That's exactly how we implement the changes and the additions to our microservices. So in the user experience service, for example, let's say at the very beginning, we didn't have widgets where you could create different, blocks of widgets. We would put that into a 2-week sprint, user stories, turns into development, tested, and in 2 weeks' time, you would have that user experience done and in production. Then let's say the next thing you needed was some sort of a lookup, right? I'm just generalizing lookup. There's all different types, but we could put that into a 2-week sprint and then deliver it. So what we do on the project side, we sort of run the project in sprints as well, right? Because it sort of aligns with what's being delivered along the way. And that way we're constantly delivering and upgrading, and you're getting value for your money quicker along the way versus waiting for a long period of time to get something into production. So I just wanted to, kind of give a couple of answer that question on the microservices, and then a little bit on the agile there. So.
If I can share a real world example also.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Large insurer who chose to build their own core system suite, their own policy billing, and decided to do it in a microservices way, and kind of I don't want to say all at once, right? But they are really their goal is moving towards a full system modernization effort that they've built. So kind of flipping it a little bit in terms of real world example, using microservices architecture as their underlying architecture for building the whole their own systems. But the key there is that they're taking an approach that they see will deliver all the values that we've been discussing, right? Except it's them delivering it rather than a vendor. They're the vendor to their business consumer. But also recognition that it allows them flexibility in the future. They see all of these pieces as something that they can do in a way that is competitive differentiator, that they can do better than what they can buy, but see that if in the future there's a component that they say, you know what, why are we supporting this component we built from scratch? It's not really giving us any value compared to what's out there in the marketplace. They can just swap it in easily from the vendor marketplace. And so as an insurer, there's kind of two ways of thinking about it. All these microservices you're getting from vendors. The other way is you adopt an insurer adopts a microservices architecture, and it allows them to swap out pieces much more easily determining when and where they have value to the organization for doing
Yeah,
so.
and that's the hybrid approach,
Yeah.
build and buy.
Yeah,
And
I think
that you talked about before.
Yeah, I think there's incredible value in a hybrid approach, especially I think for an insurer that's really honest with themselves about what their true capabilities are, what their true core competencies are, and can strategically think through. Jeff, to your example, if you can build a billing system that will actually give you a competitive edge in the market, whether that's we get paid faster, we can pay our brokers commissions faster, thereby brokers will send us more business because they know we'll pay them faster. If you know that to be the case, then it might actually be worthwhile to do that. But it's still, I think, the core of this particular presentation, doing it in an agile and microservices fashion, still it makes the most sense to doing it that way, because under no circumstances should you have to shut down the whole system because you need to repair one facet of it. I think that's to me, that gets to the big piece of this is, Gmail always runs. Google's updating that every single day, multiple times a day. Doesn't affect me. Customer doesn't know. Right? I think that's the core of what we're getting to is if you can put all of those pieces together, ultimately in a cloud-based approach, you should not have to shut down your systems. Like if something breaks, something else can just be plugged in. It can be repaired, but the rest of the system just keeps working as usual.
Yeah. Also, when insurers build their own core systems, historically, when I talk to insurers who built everything from scratch, their satisfaction with it at the organization is really high. And of course, it does exactly what they wanted to do. It's fit for purpose. Often it costs more to do than bringing in a vendor system because you had to build it. It was all development work.
Right.
You did it all yourself. It took a long time, and it was all developers. The real problem, though, is not the satisfaction upon going live. It's what happens next. These systems, when you have a vendor partner, often they're continually investing in the system and providing upgrades. That they tend to stagnate when you build it yourself. And I feel like if you are building yourself or a hybrid approach, using microservices makes it much easier to truly keep the pieces up to date that you need to focus on one at a time, to swap in vendor components, vendor microservices into your own architecture that allows you to modernize. It's just, I hate the term future-proof because it's impossible to truly future-proof, but you are architecting in a way that has an eye not just to today, but an eye to the future.
Yeah.
I think our, we've talked about this before, Jeff. I think to me, I love the WhatsApp Twilio partnership. WhatsApp being, one of probably the world's most popular messaging system, right? For international text messaging and things like that. And that has evolved considerably over the last few years. And WhatsApp outsourced their entire telecommunications subcomponent. Now, you would think that's a core competency. Like that is the make or break element, making sure that text message gets through or whatever else that's being communicated gets through is core. But they recognize that they were a communications company. And while it's risky for them to outsource it, they knew a company like Twilio would be more up to date or future proof. That piece of it. They didn't want to have to invest a ton of capital to build that expertise in-house. They just felt like it was the technology, it was too much work. The technology was advancing too rapidly, and the investment ultimately would not necessarily deliver the value that they expected. So they have like service level agreements with other companies, but Twilio's the big one. And to me, it's like if WhatsApp can outsource that piece of it, insurance companies can outsource most of what they do if they wanted to.
Hey, I have a question that someone had asked, and I'd like to, I think we could address it. Jeff, you can start or I can start, but someone wants to know, how micro do you go? Right? That's a good question.
Yes,
right?
I would say you should start with, as someone building microservices, why don't you start with that, Wendy?
Yeah, so I mean, from our perspective, we sell microservices, but there are microservices in our microservices. Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to, solve a particular piece, and that piece might have to do, like this question is saying, there's microservices amongst them. So if you look at a microservices architecture, generally it's made up of all these little containers. And at some point we should probably do an architecture discussion on microservices would be really, really helpful. It's all made up of all these little containers, and all these little containers are basically microservices, and they all message to one another. And so, see, I'm not the infrastructure architect, I guess the architect guy in the company, but what I do know is that when we're building out a microservice, our team gets together and figures out if the parts of the process are reusable elsewhere. And then what we do is we take it and we create a single container for that. A good example of that, I mean, it's a very big one, is rules. Everything uses rules. So if I was to create a user experience service and a document service and a rating service or a bordereau service, everyone uses the rule service. So the rule service is something that we containerize immediately. So I think you kind of have to, again, I'm not an architect, but I think you have to kind of figure out what you're doing, what's the process, what are you solving, and then figure out, what are the pieces that go along the process to solve that problem, and then, what are the reusable pieces that would make a nice, a reusable microservice. Yeah, that's how I would approach it.
Yeah, and I think let's think about this from you. Nick, you were talking about, the actuaries building their own stuff and underwriters creating VB code, right? Here's the deal, that the business consumers of what IT is delivering do not care about microservices or how big or small your microservices are. They care about what capabilities are delivered.
Right.
And so it's, right, and so in the end, you start thinking about capabilities, right? And the reality is you want to divide things up into a small enough segment that it's reusable, it's updatable, and that you can deliver to the business effectively. But they don't necessarily have a stake in how you divvy up. The people building it and the architects have a stake in that. And in the end, you need to think about what is the surrounding capability that has to be delivered, and what's the order that it needs to be rolled out, and what's the minimum viable product. I think we have done a terrible job as an industry understanding MVP. We tried. The phase one has 50 times more stuff than it needs to truly go live, and so you kind of start. You can use this architecture to help you enforce those best practices. But in the end, I think the business needs to understand what's going on in the background so that they get how it's delivering them value. But then it goes to the capabilities they care about, and then the people building it deliver it that way. And then I think the same thing is going to go for a lot of vendors who traditionally sell a big box, right? The reality is, if you are in the market to buy a full claim system, everything at once, even if you want the whole box, you're still better off if your vendor has architected it as microservices, right. Even if you're getting the whole box at once, because of these values that it drives.
Right. Yeah, so I'd like to, I don't want to forget one thing in this session I wanted to talk about was the data transfer, because everything, we're turning completely to data. So I remember way back when, for all of you young folks that are on the call, when, companies that had analytics like Valin Technologies were out, showing these wonderful tools that had heat maps and all this really cool stuff to take a look at your data so that you could do better underwriting. And everybody was like, what is that? Right? It's like, and then all of a sudden it was like a hot thing, analytics, right? And everybody's got to have it, right? So it's all about the data now. And it's transferring data, it's exchanging data, it's analyzing data, right? One of the things that we've uncovered is this whole bordereau management need, because carriers are in need of ingesting data they're trying to grow their distributions, and so they need more MGAs, so they're trying to ingest the data, and everybody has different formats, and then they have people and software and all that stuff. So that's one of the areas that we've applied a microservices architected solution using bordereau and rules and ETL and a variety of different little pieces together to create, this bordereau. But the basis of it is data. And the idea being that the data can be exchanged between all the different players in an ecosystem. And so we've talked about bordereau management, right? But ultimately, Nick and I, and we've talked about the blockchain need, right? And other things over time. What are the things that we should be thinking about in terms of, the data interchange? Because microservices do talk to each other through data exchange. I would think that the blockchain becomes another one of those items and then something else. And I mean, we say future-proof, but, thinking through what are the implications of not being ready, right? So
Yeah, I think it's a huge impact. There's actually a question about, where do we start? Because it's a small insurer. What's a good first step to start? And that's such a challenging question because I call it the Golden Gate Bridge problem. The Golden Gate Bridge is so big when they paint it, by the time they're done, they just go back and start over again. Right. And so there is no end. Right. And so there's this, how do we get, the industry wants to transform itself, but into what? Into something that in 2 years is already going to need new transformation. Right. And blockchain is one of those things. Like the technology is moving so rapidly. Outsourcing with microservices to me makes so much more sense because my bread and butter day to day is the reading of the tea leaves. That's the underwriting data and making decisions off of that. I'm essentially making bets, right? And so to me, it's data analysis, make those bets. I won't have time to keep up with all of the different technological changes that are occurring. I expect that blockchain is going to make a major impact. How exactly, I'm not sure. But we're already starting to see signs of it. And I get worried in some ways that we're quickly moving to we're trying to move to the cloud. We're trying to do these things to transform our businesses. And then we do that. And it's like, now it's like blockchain's taking over. We have to start it over again, that process. And to me, to some of the points that we talked about, with Agile and MVP, I think if we take a page from how the tech companies are withstanding the evolution that's occurring underneath their feet, right? The ground that's changing shape. I think the insurance company has to take a page from that and learn that we need to think of ourselves as data companies and not as insurance companies. Insurance is how we monetize the data, but data is data, and we have to start transforming our entire organization to be a data movement company. We absorb data, we curate it, we enrich it, we do things with it, and then we share the results of it with other stakeholders. And as someone that's incumbent in the industry, I'm actually a little bit indifferent about. I just like, give me technology, make that process better. Let's keep making it better. But I can't do both. I can't keep up to date with trying to figure out the underwriting piece of it and the tech piece. I think it's too much to ask for most carriers, especially small carriers, which is where the question came from. I honestly, I think small carriers are the ones that are going to struggle the most because they won't have the resources, and the cultural element that they have to overcome, I think, is so big that I think they almost have to philosophically look inwards and just say, who are we and why are we here?
Right. But it does mean each individual project can be smaller when you take a microservices approach. But we also have to realistically assess the fact that when you do a small project, one microservice, it has to fit into a larger set of systems. And it's possible you've got a legacy system that's just not going to work that way, right? It doesn't have your legacy system probably doesn't have any API access. It's all flat file management, and that is tough. But there's not an easy answer to that issue. And sometimes you have to shoehorn something in there for the time being. It's setting you up for a future where you won't have that problem again. right? Where when things change out from underneath you, you've architected in such a way that you can update the pieces that matter, one at a time. So
That's true.
Yeah.
That's Jeff. That's a risk management
Yeah.
element to this. Microservices is a better risk management solution to the risk of, hey, our technology is just not good enough, right? It's how would you protect a large industrial facility from fire? Well, one way you do it is make sure that fire can't go from one section to the other. Right. And I think microservices is the same thing.
Right.
If a technology advances, or if the technology that you have that's performing a particular function isn't quite up to speed, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like microservices actually is a more complete solution because you only have to fix that piece and not necessarily the entire chain.
Right.
When insurers got a core system, oh, sorry, go ahead, Wendy.
No, you go ahead, and then I'll go after you. Go ahead.
So when insurers got a core system in the past, they were investing in a core system for like 20, 30 years, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we have systems still running that were put in place in the 70s and 80s. And so it's not true. Technology is evolving much faster than it did then, and it's just not true anymore. And at NOARC, we often say you're buying a system for 10 years, which is terrifying if it takes you 4 years to get it live. You're like, half the lifespan was implemented, right? But it's true. And then there's some the reality is, okay, if you keep it up to date, it'll be evolving. But the reality is the lifespan is not going to be what it used to be. But with microservices, if you have a microservices environment, then the idea of not having the same system today as you do 10 years from now is not scary at all, because in fact, it seems natural. This idea that, okay, great, when it's time to replace a service with a more modern variant, or from another vendor, or just your current vendor, or just rebuild it from scratch because you have a competitive differentiator there, that's a totally understandable thing. And yeah, of course, in 10 years, your core system will be different than it is today, but it was built for that, and it is a clear win for the insurer, and that's the statement goes from being terrifying to being sure, no big deal.
Right. So that's a good full circle, because I think we're now at the point where we say, so how do I look at this? How do I evaluate this microservice? And from my perspective, I think we've covered a lot of really interesting topics, that are things to noodle, when you leave the webinar. But, what I would recommend always is to try to figure out where your pain point is, right? What is your pain point? What are the things that are bothering you, that are slowing you down, that are not allowing you to be more efficient, right? Whether it's something that's incoming, that data needs to be consumed, whether it's not being able to maintain something on your own, whether it's managing or dealing with a bordereau, whatever it might be, look at your pain point and say, how do I solve this? And focus on that, one pain point at a time. So Jeff and Nick, thank you so much for your time today. This was a really great discussion. Next time we go through the architecture, the Kubernetes. It's such a fancy word. I love it.
I can't wait.
Kubernetes containers. I'm learning a lot too. Believe me, it's really fantastic. If anyone has any questions for us, I don't know how to get in touch with us, but there's probably a way through OIC Global. Nick Lamparelli is also on LinkedIn. Everybody knows Jeff. So thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thanks, guys. Great chat.
Thank you.
Okay, take care. Bye bye.